Welcome to Historias Entre Vidas. The morning mist still hadn't fully lifted over Doa Amparo Rivas's orchard when old Eleuterio Cisneros found the porch chair empty for the first time in 11 years. Doa Amparo had died that early morning, alone, in her sleep, after a lifetime devoted to her beehives and her orange orchard in the lowlands of Veracruz. She'd never had children of her own, but had raised, reluctantly at first, a distant niece named Petra, daughter of a cousin who had left her in Doa Amparo's care as a child and never came back for her. Petra arrived at that house at 8 years old, with a bundle of clothes and a fear she couldn't yet name. Her father, a man of few words and less responsibility, had left her just for a few days while I sort out some business, and those days turned into weeks, then months, until Doa Amparo, already resigned, stopped expecting any word from him. The first months were hard for both of them. Petra cried at night calling for a father who never returned, and Doa Amparo, who had lived alone so long she no longer quite remembered how to comfort a child, learned through trial and error. It was the orchard itself that brought them together. Petra, looking for something to do with her hands so she wouldn't think so much, began following Doa Amparo among the hives, and little by little, without either of them intending it, became her constant shadow, learning to tell the calm hum of the bees from the alarm hum, learning to stir the copper pots without burning herself, learning the exact rhythm for turning the orange preserves so they wouldn't stick to the bottom. Doa Amparo's orchard was known throughout the region for its honey, a thick golden honey she drew from hives inherited from her own father, and for orange preserves she sold on Saturdays in the town market, always wrapped in the same waxed paper, tied with red thread. No one knew exactly how she achieved that particular flavor, that exact point of sweetness and tartness that made people line up early to buy from her. Doa Amparo kept that recipe the way one keeps a family secret, never writing it down anywhere, passing it on only from memory, hand to hand. Petra, who had grown up in that house since age 8, knew the recipe by heart too, because she had helped Doa Amparo since childhood stir the copper pots, measure out just the right amount of cinnamon, watch the sugar reach the exact point, without burning it. But Petra, now 25, had married 2 years earlier a man named Ferm Landeros from the neighboring town, who from the very beginning had looked at Doa Amparo's orchard with more interest than he ever showed his own wife. When Ferm abandoned Petra barely 6 months after the wedding, claiming he couldn't stand living so far from town. The whole town knew the real reason. Ferm had learned, through an indiscreet cousin, that Doa Amparo's orchard and hives were worth far more than that simple adobe house let on, because a buyer from the capital had secretly been looking for whoever produced that famous honey and those preserves, willing to pay a lucrative contract to buy them in bulk. From the first day of the marriage, Ferm had asked questions that seemed to Petra like simple new husband curiosity: how much the hives sold per month, whether Doa Amparo planned to leave her the orchard someday, whether she considered modernizing the business with a partner from the city. Petra, still in love and suspecting nothing, answered with the innocence of someone who can't imagine affection being faked so well. It was only later, watching Ferm lose interest in her at almost the same rate he lost hope of controlling her aunt's business, that she began to understand what had really happened. Unable to convince Petra to pressure her aunt into selling early, he left. He packed his things one early morning, without even saying goodbye, leaving only a short note saying things weren't working out and that everyone needed their own space. Petra found the note on the kitchen table next to the jar of honey she herself had prepared for him that week. And from then on, the whole town murmured, each with their own version, that Petra had driven him off with her temper, that Doa Amparo never wanted any man near her land, that the girl must have done something for a husband to leave her so soon. No one asked for the full truth. They preferred whichever version was most entertaining at the Saturday market. What the town didn't know was that, 11 years earlier, when Petra arrived at that house as a girl, frightened and with barely a bundle of clothes, it had been old Eleuterio, already in charge of the hives for decades by then, who had made a silent promise to Doa Amparo. On the night, the woman, worried about her own already failing health, confided her deepest fear to him. Eleuterio had come to that orchard as a young man, long before Petra was born, hired by Doa Amparo's own father to look after the first hives. Over the years, he'd become something more than a simple caretaker. He was the one who knew every corner of that land, who could tell exactly when it would rain just by watching the bees' flight, and who, without ever saying so aloud, had come to love Doa Amparo and later Petra as if they were his own family, though he'd never had one of his own. "Eleuterio, I don't have the strength I used to," Doa Amparo had told him that night, sitting in her porch chair, hands clasped together, "and I worry about what will happen to this girl when I'm gone. She has no one else in this world, and this town can be cruel to a woman alone. As long as I have life in me, Doa Amparo, that girl will not be alone," Eleuterio had answered, with the simplicity of someone who doesn't promise things he doesn't intend to keep. "I swear it on my own mother. May she rest in peace." Doa Amparo never mentioned that conversation again, but Eleuterio kept it the way one keeps an oath sworn before God as witness. In the years that followed, without Petra fully noticing, Eleuterio became a constant but quiet presence, the one who fixed the fence when something fell, the one who taught Petra to tell a healthy hive from a sick one, the one who always appeared at just the right moment without anyone having to call him. 11 years later, that promise was about to be tested. The day of the burial, half the town came to say goodbye to Doa Amparo, because even though she lived out at her orchard, everyone had tasted her honey at some point, and everyone owed her, in one way or another, some quiet favor. A jar of honey for someone sick with no money for medicine, preserves given away in lean times. Buyers from the market came too, people who had lined up on Saturdays for years, and even the town priest, who said a few simple words about a woman who sweetened more lives than she herself ever realized. Petra, dressed in simple mourning, received condolences with eyes swollen from crying, while Eleuterio stayed nearby, not saying much, but not stepping away either. As soon as the novena ended, Furman reappeared. He arrived in town one afternoon, riding a borrowed horse, in new clothes he clearly hadn't paid for himself, and showed up at the orchard demanding to speak with Petra as her legitimate husband, which he still was, even if they lived apart. "This orchard is still part of my marital property," he announced, standing in the middle of the yard as Petra came out to meet him with her heart in her throat. "And now that your aunt is gone, I've come to claim what's owed to me." Petra, her voice trembling but her head unbowed, answered, "This orchard was never yours, Firm. You never worked a single day in it. You left a year and a half ago without looking back. But we're still married, Petra, and the law says what's yours is also mine." What Firm didn't know yet was that Doa Amparo, months before dying, had settled a matter that was about to completely change the ground under this argument. That same night, after Firm left without a final answer, Petra sat in the porch chair where her aunt used to sit every evening and cried quietly, exhausted, not knowing if she'd have the strength to fight alone against a husband who only wanted the land and had never wanted her. It was Eleuterio who found her there, and who sat beside her on the step, in silence, until she could speak. "I don't know what I'm going to do, Eleuterio. Firm isn't going to stop until he gets something, and I don't know how to fight lawyers or papers on my own. You're not alone, girl. I made a promise to your aunt 11 years ago, and that promise is still alive, even though she's gone." Tomorrow we'll go see the notary together. The following days were a tense wait. Firm, emboldened by the advice of a city lawyer who could smell a lucrative lawsuit, began spreading his own version of events around town. That Petra had gotten everything thanks to her aunt, without deserving it. That a woman alone couldn't run a business this size. That he, as the legitimate husband, was only asking for what was fair. The town, always ready to gossip, began to split. Some remembered the affection Doa Amparo had for Petra and doubted Firm's words. Others, more given to easy gossip, repeated his complaints in the market without a second thought, enjoying the scandal more than they cared about the truth. Doa Casimira, the same woman who sold vegetables in the market, was among the first to repeat Firm's version, telling every customer who approached her stall that Petra girl was always odd. Raised by a spinster out in the middle of nowhere, what can you expect? Other neighbors, more discreet, preferred not to say anything out loud, but they also stopped approaching Petra's preserves stand the way they used to, leaving her more alone there than usual. It was in those days that Eleuterio, going through Doa Amparo's things with Petra's permission, found at the bottom of a kitchen drawer, wrapped in the same waxed paper she used for the preserves, a document Doa Amparo had signed months before dying. A contract with the buyer from the capital, formally granting Petra, and only Petra, all rights to the honey and preserve recipe, along with a clause establishing that the orchard and hives were registered exclusively in her niece's name, with no spouse, present or future, able to claim any right over them. But Eleuterio didn't know yet that this paper, kept so carefully among the kitchen's simplest things, was about to turn out to be the exact proof that would silence the whole town. Doa Amparo thought of everything. Petra, Eleuterio said, the paper in his hands, his voice breaking with emotion. She knew this could happen. That's why she left it signed before a notary, dated and all, long before Firm dared to claim anything. Petra took the paper with trembling hands and read it twice, hardly able to believe what was in front of her. She never told me any of this. Your aunt wasn't one to say things ahead of time. She was one to have things ready, quietly, for when they were needed. The next day, Eleuterio and Petra went before the town notary, Licenciado Servando Molina, who immediately confirmed the document's validity. This is completely legal, Petra, signed, sealed, and registered 3 months before your aunt's passing. The orchard, the hives, and the rights to the recipe belong exclusively to you. No husband, present or past, has any legal claim over it. When Firm found out, he arrived at the orchard furious, accompanied by his city lawyer, a man in a tailored suit who spoke with the confidence of someone used to intimidating simple people. This is just some piece of paper, the lawyer said, without even looking at it carefully. Any judge can throw it out if we prove the lady wasn't of sound mind when she signed it. Doa Amparo was more lucid than any of us right up to her last days, Licenciato Molina answered, unbothered. I witnessed it myself, and there are 2 more witnesses who signed that day, both still alive and willing to testify before any judge who asks. Firm, seeing the legal ground closing under him, changed tactics. This isn't over, Petra. The whole town knows a woman alone can't handle a business this size. You're going to need help, and when you need it, you'll have to come looking for me. Petra is not alone, and she never will be while I'm still breathing, Eleuterio said, stepping forward before Petra could answer. And she's been running this business with these hands since she was a girl, while you barely learned to tell a hive from a honeycomb. Firm looked at him with contempt. Nobody asked you anything, old man. This is between my wife and me. You're mistaken, young Firm, Licenciado Molina cut in an unhurried voice. This is no longer a matter between spouses. It's a matter of clearly established legal property. and you have no right to it. I'd suggest you consult your own lawyer before making any more public accusations." It was Eleuterio who answered this time, stepping forward with the firm voice of someone who has spent a lifetime working that land. "This woman is not alone, Firm. I've been tending these hives since before you were born, and I'm not going anywhere. And this town, even if it likes to gossip on Saturdays, also knows how to recognize who works and who just comes to collect what they never planted." The city lawyer, seeing there was nothing more to gain there, took Firm by the arm and made him leave, not without first warning him quietly that a publicly lost lawsuit would cost him more in reputation than any land he might have claimed. Firm left that afternoon, riding the same borrowed horse he'd arrived on, and didn't show his face in town again for months. The gossip that had split the town for weeks began to fade almost as quickly as it had started. Doa Casimira, the same woman who sold vegetables in the market, was among the first to change her tune, remarking one Saturday, while serving a customer, that Petra girl was always hard-working, and it's plain to see her aunt knew exactly who to leave things to. Other neighbors, seeing that Firm didn't return and that Petra kept running the business with the same dedication as always, slowly began approaching the preserve stand again on Saturdays. Some even with a half apology for having doubted her, because sometimes the most desperate moments are the ones that reveal who was willing to keep their word and who was only waiting for a chance to take advantage. Months passed. Petra, with Eleuterio's constant help, learned to run the whole business, the hives, the contract with the buyer from the capital, and the Saturday sale of preserves, which she kept making with the same waxed paper and the same red thread her aunt had always used. At first her hands trembled measuring the cinnamon alone, without Doa Amparo's voice guiding her from behind. But over time the rhythm came back, almost as if her own hands remembered what her heart still doubted. There were hard weeks too, learning to manage money she used to only ever see pass through her aunt's hands, making small mistakes that cost her a whole batch of burnt preserves. Nights when she doubted whether she could really handle all of it alone. But every time the doubt grew too large, there was Eleuterio, not saying much, simply present, reminding her with his calm that hard things are learned slowly, not in a single day. The contract with the buyer from the capital turned out to be more generous than Petra had imagined, enough to fix the roof of the house, buy 2 new hives, and even hire a girl from town to help on Saturdays at the market. Eleuterio, who never asked for anything in return for his help beyond a place to grow old near the bees he'd tended his whole life, settled permanently into a small room next to the orchard, having become not just the caretaker, but something like the grandfather Petra had never had. Autumn came, and with it the season when the hives gave their best honey, the most golden and thick of the year. One afternoon, as the sun sank slowly over the orange trees and the air filled with the calm hum of bees returning to their combs, Petra sat in the porch chair, the same one her aunt used to sit in every evening, and for the first time in months felt the weight in her chest loosen a little. The smell of ripe oranges, mixed with the sweet smoke Eleuterio used to calm the bees before checking the combs, a smell that by now felt as familiar to Petra as her own home. Eleuterio settled onto his usual step, a cup of coffee in his hands, watching the day's last bees make their slow way back to the hives before night fell. "Who appeared in your life when no one was looking at you anymore?" Petra said, almost to herself, watching the bees at work. "An old man who made a promise to my aunt 11 years ago, and kept it even when no one else expected him to." "It wasn't only a promise, girl," Eleuterio answered, with a tired smile. "It was also love. Promises are kept out of obligation. Love stays even after the promise is already fulfilled." Petra smiled, eyes wet, and looked out over the whole orchard, the hives at work, the orange trees heavy with fruit, the house with its roof already repaired, and her aunt's empty chair, which now, without anyone having planned it, had become the place where Petra and Eleuterio sat every evening to watch the sun go down. If this story touched something in your heart, don't hesitate to leave your comment. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss a single story, and share it with someone who needs to remember that promises made from the heart find a way to be kept. Until the next story. And in that town, to this day, when someone asks about the sweetest honey in the region, people still point to the same orchard by the river and say that a woman lives there who was never as alone as everyone believed.